All right. Did y'all miss me? Because I did. Yeah, I had last week. I had to take care of some things, so I wasn't actively trading, but I was, taking a peek here and there what the market was doing, and honestly, it did nothing. So I saved a lot of mental capital. Okay, so what I'm gonna dive into in this little short review here is the outlook I gave about 2 weeks and a half ago is still in effect today. Okay, we'll go over that. We'll go over the newsletter I sent out yesterday, which continues to reference back into the outlook I gave. And then we'll touch up a little bit on what we're looking at heading into Wednesday. So, to fully understand, we got to zoom out and look at the bigger picture when we're in the daily time frame, okay? Now, about 2 months or so, something significant happened in the daily time frame and the weekly time frame. The market broke above these two pivots, okay? Right here, we're in the September contract. That's the most, by the way, that's the most significant thing that happened last week was the rollover. Other than that, snooze fest. So, anyways, the market broke above 71.25, 71.84, which is this gray zone. Now, market does two things from my perspective, which is trend and consolidates. It flips from those two modes back and forth. All it does. Okay, it's very easy. Now, every time frame is going to be doing something different. Okay, but the more you zoom out onto the bigger time frames, the more significant those modes are going to be. Okay, and right now we're looking at the daily time frame. Okay, and what's significant about this daily time frame is the market triggered a big breakout out of above this zone. Okay, and since breaking above the zone, what has the market been doing the past 2 or so months? It's been trending, right? So, knowing that, who does the market belong to? Who holds the primary trend? Easy. Bulls. Okay? And let's reference back to what I just said about 1 minute ago or so. What does the market do? What two things does the market do? Trend and consolidates. So we're looking at the daily time frame. We know that the market triggered a bigger breakout above this zone. And it's been trending. We failed to trend to keep trending back in early June. Okay? That was our first sign of possible exhaustion. And as I advised to readers in early June, failing to break higher, what states would the market be entering? What comes after trend? Oh, consolidation. Perfect, right? So, about 2 weeks and a half ago, the range we came up with was this gray zone here. Okay, now if we zoom into it, okay, the outlook I gave back in early June was if we were unable to keep breaking higher, which we did, it was possible we were to enter a consolidation state. Okay, and this was the projected range here. All right, so about 2 weeks and a half ago, sellers triggered a breakdown out of below this range. All right, now I did advise on here, but we'll just swipe that. Breaking down below this range, buyers immediately stepped in to reclaim back over. At that time it was 74.63, I believe. Yeah, 74.62. This is updated here. But buyers stepped in, okay, on a failed breakdown of, I believe it was Tuesday's low or Monday's low. Okay. Reclaiming that triggered, a rally back into the lower end of this range. Bulls managed to get back inside of this range. And all that happened last week was bulls maintained value, the market value, inside of this range. That's all they did. Okay, so yeah, about 2 weeks and a half ago, sellers triggered a breakdown. They failed to hold. From an intraday, failed to breakdown. Buyers set up a rally back into here, popped back inside of this range. And all that happened last week was bulls were maintaining value inside of this range, which was a good, outlook. Okay. Nothing significant, nothing crazy. Okay. Very stalemate. So, what I talked about in yesterday's newsletter was we were to continue to monitor this range right here. Okay. From 70 updated now. From 77.39 updated down into 74.72. Okay. So we brought it up just slightly, okay? Now, we also brought it up because 74.72 happens to be last week's low. Okay, and when we zoom one time frame smaller, we're looking at the 4-hour time frame. From reclaiming back inside of this range, last week we defended it, and we've just been holding inside of it. Okay, now in yesterday's newsletter, okay, this was our focus still, and our focus was, would buyers be able to continue to hold the market value inside of this range? All right. Now, I did talk about the downside risk, and the downside risk was getting under an intraday level, which was 75.27. Now, I mentioned that, right here, I advise readers to stay cautious that, getting under 75.27. I advise readers to stay cautious as this puts the lower end of the 4-hour range back into play, and what sits there, the buy zone, 75.04 into 75.72, which bulls must defend to keep any relief in play. Coincidentally, 74.72 is also a previous week low, and this is acting as the first sell trigger for bears to break to set off any short-term sell. Okay, so as I advised, any potential or the downside risk was getting under 75.27. Okay, and this started off very early in yesterday's overnight session, heading into Tuesday. We lost 75.27, and what this did was put the lower end of the 4-hour range back into play. And this is the lower end of the 4-hour range. Keep in mind, it's also the low of last week. So in order to trigger any further downside, bears would have to break down 74.72. Okay, to set off any short-term sell. And bears did break down 74. The sellers did break down under 74.72 in the overnight session, heading into Tuesday's cash session. Now, let's zoom in a little into these intraday time frames. All right. Now, where did I pull 75.27? It's this is where we were holding on these smaller time frames. That's where I pulled that level from. We broke down, we lost 75.27, and all that did was expand the market down into 74.72. Okay, and in the overnight session, sellers broke down 74.72, which led the market to a low of overnight session low of 74.21. Okay, so this was a very important and significant number. This was a very important number heading into Tuesday's cash session, which I advised to watch. Now, I advised longs would only come into play, an opportunity would only show up if buyers can hold above 74.21. Okay, and holding above 74.21 can potentially set up the market to retest 74.72. Okay, and to make things look better, buyers would have to maintain above 74.72. Okay, but in order to reach this area, it all began with 74.21, and I advised to watch this level. It was overnight session low, and it was significant because sellers broke down 74.72 on the bigger time frames, which led us to 74.21. So heading into the cash open for Tuesday, for any further downside or continuation on the downside, they would have to break down 74.21. Now what happened was sellers looked under 74.21, and this happened so quick. Looking under 74.21, they immediately failed, and buyers pushed the market back over 74.21. This is a long entry here. They looked under, failed, and quickly reclaimed 74.21. Okay, and this trapped shorts here, and the reclaim of 74.21, the failed breakdown of 74.21, led the markets on an intraday rally back into retesting the lower end of the 4-hour range. Okay, coming back into 74.72, we broke above it, and we immediately failed to hold on an intraday view, and we were met with sellers. Okay, and every time we came back up here, we got rejected. Okay, so yeah, it was very straightforward session for Tuesday. Okay, right here when we zoom out, look at the bigger time frames. We trapped on an intraday view, short sellers, and this set us up to attempt to reclaim back into here. Okay, but retesting into that lower end. Yeah, retesting into that lower end, of the 4-hour range here, we got rejected, and now we're just hanging out under. Okay, so that's why it's very important to look at smaller time frames. Okay, I did mention, for us to look better, the market has to maintain above 74.72. All right, we have to reclaim this area. All right, but the intraday time frames, really help us stay one step ahead. Okay, that 15-minute time frame, is very easy. Offered long opportunities on a failed breakdown of the overnight low right here, as we went over, and that failed breakdown triggered a long entry that set up a beautiful rally back into this lower end. Now what most people do is they miss that, and they're gonna go ahead and attempt to long in this area. Okay, but this is a breakdown level, and coming into 74.72, if you were able to catch longs in this area, we're trimming here, we're managing risk, because we don't know if buyers are going to be able to maintain market value above there, or what if they fail to reclaim this? What if we're met with a second wave of very hard selling pressure? We don't know. So that's why we don't want to FOMO into these type of breakdown levels. That's why these intraday levels offer, they help us stay one step ahead. Okay. So yeah, that's basically what happened. We retested, we failed to reclaim, and we're hanging below 74.72. That's not a good sign to see. Okay, so I do advise on the long side for us to be cautious. Okay, because we're hanging below a 4-hour short pivot. That's not a good sign. Okay, so just because we're hanging below this 74.72, I would be cautious and very picky with longs. All right, so let's go ahead and zoom in, and we'll give a little overview on what we're looking at for Wednesday here. Let me see. All right. So, yeah, that was a great long entry. We failed to reclaim, so we're back on the sidelines. All right, that's my position right now. I'm on the sidelines for tomorrow. So, like I said, we're being very cautious with longs. Okay, very cautious with longs. So this is what I'm looking at. This is a general overview for Wednesday. Right here. All right. Best case scenario. If we can move above 74.59, okay, that signals intraday strength for us. And it gives us, an early entry for longs. Okay, so above 74.59 is the best case scenario for bulls, and I would look for longs if we can push back above 74.59. This opens up, to retest 74.72. If we can move it back over 74.72, that can trigger a very nice rally. Okay, we can possibly, if we can get above 74.59 and hold above, I would keep eyes for a retest at 75.27. Okay, where sellers first stepped in. Okay. However, like I said, we want to be picky. We want to be cautious with longs. If we cannot get back over 74.59, I would stay patient. Stay patient, stay cautious, and watch this gray zone down here. Okay? And what I'm watching for is failed breakdowns. Okay, so right now, like I said, when we're looking at the bigger time frames, we're hanging below 74.72. So that means that sellers have the upper hand right now. Okay, so we're watching them. We're letting them make the first move. Okay, so hanging under 74.72, we're like, all right, sellers, let's see what you got. What are you going to do? And they have one job, and that's to break down this gray zone here. And that's where I'm interested. Okay, if sellers break it, we're watching for weakness of that failed. We're watching for weakness of that breakdown. Getting under this gray zone, and sellers fail to hold, reclaiming back over 74.15, 74.20. That's the zone we're watching. Okay, reclaiming back over the zone, I would get long. I would get long above 74.15, and I would target 74.28, 74.35-ish. Okay, the main targets are going to be 74.28, 74.43, and 74.59. Okay, that's the scenario I'm watching if sellers look to test this area. And getting into this area, they have one job, and that's to break down. Breaking down under here, there's nothing to do. But the moment the market comes right back up and reclaims this area, this is a long entry. Okay, and we get long above 74.15 on a failed breakdown attempt. We get 74.43, 74.59 as the first set of targets. All right, if sellers do break this zone down and just continue trending lower, we're watching this buy zone here that stretches from 73.82 down into 73.39. And what we're watching is to see how price acts if it dips inside of this zone. Okay, if price dips inside of this zone and gets immediately met with buying pressure and pushes the market back over 73.82, that's a long entry I would be stocking. Okay, so yeah, pretty straightforward on what we're watching into tomorrow. Like I said, if we can get above 74.59, just let sellers do their thing. Let them break this area down. This is our first area of interest to watch for long entries. We're not baiting on it. We're watching for a failed breakdown. If sellers do break it down, that's fine. Take us to this zone. Okay, we're watching this zone here. If we can dip into it, we want to see how price acts here. If we get met with buying pressure and pushes the market back over 73.82, no, that's a good sign to see. All right, so right here. So pretty big area we're watching on the daily time frame, watching for traps here. So yeah, that's a general outlook for Wednesday. So we shall see. Pretty simple.